Hello, everyone, and welcome to the More Than a Kids Movie podcast, where we take a look at famous animated features that we all watched when we were kids and determine if they are still able to provide something valuable for adults today. I am joined by my guests Tyndall Dickinson, Ross Corman O'Reilly, and Rafe Hutchins.
Hello, everyone.
Hello, everybody.
And in this episode, we will discuss one of the most famous Dreamworks films of all time, How to Train Your Dragon. So, can anyone here give me a synopsis of the movie? Is anyone very confident in their synopsis of capabilities?
I can take that. Yes. So the first film follows a kid named Hiccup who is struggling. He wants to be accepted in his Viking village, and in order to do that, he needs to be a dragon fighter. This village, and on the island of Berk, they fight dragons. And when finding an injured Night Fury, he attempts to he thinks he's gonna kill it, but then he gets too nervous and he ends up letting it go. And in letting it go, he kind of starts to study this dragon. He learns about it and learns that they aren't quite as evil as everybody thinks they are, and that, they can actually be friends if the Viking people are accepting of that.
Beautiful synopsis. Thank you very much, Tyndall. And I want to ask you guys about your first impressions of this film. We just watched this film yesterday for the first time for some of us, the first time in a while for some of us, the first time in a week. But just you guys just give me your first impressions on this movie, just in general.
I'll jump in here. So last time I watched this film definitely must have been when I was, super, super young. But from when I watched it last night, it was still the classic that I remembered. I still very much enjoyed it. And although I had to almost leave the end, it was still gave me the same feeling from what I had when I was a boy. I thought it was very interesting. Ross said that the animation kind of felt a bit outdated, which I can see, but it didn't affect the feeling that I had. But yeah.
Yeah, just to hop off of that. I still remember the first time I watched it with my mom, and it was such a fun experience. I think the film is absolutely timeless. I probably watch it once at least every year. I kind of go back and try and watch the trilogy. It's my favorite animated trilogy of all time. And I don't know. I feel like the themes that it tackles are very universal, and kind of everybody can find something that they kind of relate to and identify with in Hiccup. He's such a relatable character. And I think, yes, the animation does change kind of throughout the course of the films, and the first one might be, a little bit outdated and not like the second and the third, but I think there's something kind of sweet about that. Every time I watch it, kind of gives me kind of that nostalgia, bring it back to like the first time I watched it, which was such a fun time.
Rafe, you made the claim that I was, bashing the animation, which quite frankly just is not true. I mean, certainly animation has improved since the film came out back in 2010, but I think the look of it is just gorgeous. When we were watching it last night, I mean, the whole romantic flight sequence when the dragon he's going diagonal and through the clouds, that stuff all definitely holds up.
Yes, absolutely.
Definitely.
I know there
Yes.
I'll say that there are some movies where you can just talk with your friends during it and it's a fun time with the friends. But when we were watching this one, I would like turn over to Ross and I would say something and he just wouldn't respond because he was so locked into the movie. So I'd say that's a pretty good review, would you say, Ross?
Yeah, I'd say, well, also you have to remember that for some of these scenes, it's the dialogue is very crucial. So when you have someone blabbing in your ear, you can't exactly follow the story. But yeah, I'd say it's a good testament to how engaging the movie is.
And how bad your friends are. Tyndall,
I
did you,
wouldn't go that far.
Tyndall, did you have something that you wanted to add or no?
I was just gonna go off of what Ross was saying about the dragon flight scenes. I love those so much, and in every film, there's always like you have a moment between Hiccup and Toothless where they're kind of in the sky together. And I think like just the animation in all films, including the first, it's so iconic that first scene they fly together. And I think the score as well, it just kind of really immerses you and it like the music makes you feel like you're floating and with them kind of up in the clouds, it's just you feel like anything's possible when you're watching those scenes. And that has never changed for me, anytime that I watch the film.
Absolutely. All right. Now that we've established how we feel about the quality of the film for our first impressions, it's time for us to dive into how adult-centric or kid-centric we think the film is. Do we think it appeals to kids more than adults? If so, how much? In order to answer this question, we will judge How to Train Your Dragon based on 5 categories: humor, themes, subtlety, layers, and censoring. For each of these categories, we will decide whether we think the movie gets full marks for that section or not. By the end of the podcast, we will have a score out of 5 to give the movie. For context, for this out of 5 score, a 0 out of 5 would mean that the movie is probably something only enjoyable to watch if you're a kid, or if you just want to revisit something that you watched as a kid. Think of something like Dora or Barney. Meanwhile, a 3 out of 5 would mean that there are multiple parts of the movie that are enjoyable for adults, and they might watch it on their own. A 5 out of 5 is the highest honor and means that the average adult would enjoy watching the whole movie and feel comfortable watching it or suggesting it to friends. Also, just want to say a quick reminder that this is not meant to say that you can't enjoy a movie that we say is a 0 out of 5 on this scale. I personally love Barney. The goal is just to determine whether the movie has elements that the average adult would enjoy just as much as when we were kids. So without further ado, let's get into the first category: humor. Okay, so for the first question I want to ask you guys, it's a pretty simple question. Did you find the supposedly funny parts of this movie actually funny? And were there any jokes that stood out to you guys?
I think the movie's pretty funny. I mean, it's not like a laugh out loud, like outrageous, zany movie, but the jokes that there are really land. Like a lot of my favorite scenes are like the with the whole dragon training gang, like Snotlout and Fish Legs and Rough Nut and Tough Nut. I feel like all those characters are really funny and all like the dynamics with them hold up. It's yeah, there wasn't any jokes. There wasn't any like fart jokes in it that I was like, really? Like that's it's a little childish.
Yeah,
I
what? Do you want to go ahead, Tyndall?
No, you go ahead. You take it away, Ray.
No, I was just going to jump onto what Ross said there as well. I thought the dialogue in this was terrific, and like Ross said, there wasn't any fart jokes. You kind of like understood, and the jokes came from the dialogue themselves. I remember a specific scene where I think it was Snotlout. They're in the arena, and he threw an axe and he missed it at the dragon that they were fighting, and he was like, and he was trying to impress Astrid, and he said something like, "Come on, Astrid, the sun was in my eyes," and like at the same time they're being chased by this dragon which is about to kill them. I thought that was quite funny. But yeah, the dialogue holds up, and that's definitely something I noticed this time watching it around.
Yeah, just to go off of that, I definitely agree. I think the dialogue so holds up and I think nothing is too in your face. I think it's all stuff again that's like these are, young adults, young kids like trying to do this thing and I think it's the way that they, write the jokes and stuff. I think they're funny. I also think too with Toothless and Hiccup, there's definitely a lot of funny moments. The way that they kind of express Toothless is really funny. And one thing I remember is they're in the um when they're in kind of the forest and Toothless wants to like give Hiccup some of like the fish, so he like regurgitates it and then like hands it to Hiccup and is like, "Here, eat this." And he kind of like has to deal with that situation. And I think just the facial expressions, although there's not really any dialogue in those moments, those are really, really funny as well.
Yeah, some nice physical comedy. Um, Ross already kind of alluded to this, but were there any jokes in the movie that you thought, okay, that was a kid's joke? But Ross said that he couldn't think of any. Tyndall, Rafe, can you guys think of any where it would maybe took you out of the movie a little bit or no?
Not.
Yeah, nothing comes to mind.
Yeah,
Mm-mm.
yeah. Well, I think that's a good. We're on the right track then. Um, are there any jokes that you think would have gone over your head when you were a kid that you get now? And also, if you guys,
The only thing I can think of is like the breastplate hat that he gets. I don't know that like I
Yeah,
think Rafe leaned when we watched it, Rafe leaned over to me and he was like, "Yeah, I don't remember that,"
yeah,
or
yeah.
something like that.
That's it. That's so true. Yeah, I completely forgot about that, but that's it's completely true.
yeah, I feel like this movie has pretty much all of its jokes work universally versus like I know me and Rafe watched the other day Madagascar 2, which maybe we should discuss in a later podcast. But that movie is full of like jokes for kids and then jokes for adults where it's just like holy bejesus, I did not realize that as a kid.
I think Madagascar 2 is definitely an example where it can be viewed for like adults and kids. But if you're, a kid watching it, you can still enjoy it. But if you're an adult watching it, it's like you pick up on those jokes which you wouldn't have got.
I want to ask you guys some of the very few very few like negations against How to Train Your Dragon as a franchise, I guess, is with its comic relief characters like Not Loud and Fish Legs and complaints that like they can just kind of be annoying at times instead of funny, especially for the later films. So I just want to ask you guys just what you think of those characters in general, if you enjoyed those characters.
I absolutely love those characters. I think they're not annoying at all whatsoever. And I feel like, especially in the later films, they're very much needed because, like, the second and third How to Train Your Dragons get pretty dark. And I feel like every time, like, they enter the room, I'm like, okay, like, now, like, we know at least, like, something funny is going to come of this. Or, like, I can, like, chill for a second before something bad happens. And I think in the first movie as well, I think they're so funny. And I laugh every time I see them. And I don't think they get annoying at all whatsoever.
Yeah, who is slandering fish legs and snotlat? I didn't even know that was a thing. Is that a thing that
It
people don't like them?
It's a little bit of a thing for like the film reviewers. They're like, ah, these characters are stupid. They're for the kids, basically. Is some
Okay.
slander is like they're only there for the kids to make the jokes that only the kids would enjoy.
Mm.
Yeah. Well, those reviewers, I mean, let's face it, they're snobbish, and I really don't care at all what they have to say because they just
I
seem quite miserable.
I can sort of argue that, they are there for the kids. Maybe they're not there, for, like the best intentions, but they're Ross, we got to have a civil conversation about this,
To our
mate.
viewers, to our viewers at home, Ross is just mocking Rafe as he tries to make his point. As
That's a false allegation.
Let's have a diplomatic conversation about this, all right? Yeah, they are there. I can't remember the second one or the third one too well, but they're there, to sort of balance that audience out, so it can engage more people, I think. I wouldn't consider them stupid or irrelevant characters. I think they're there with a purpose.
and
I definitely agree with that. And I think yes, they might be catered more towards because How to Train Your Dragon is advertised as like a kid-friendly film, and I think
Mm.
those characters kind of bring out that aspect of it. If you were to take them out, I think there's some pretty like heavy, things that are like tackle. I mean, they're like killing dragons and there's fire and there's explosions, there's death. Like I think they kind of bring lightheartedness to that. And I think that definitely helps with like a younger audience. But I think they read just as well. I mean, I'm 20 and I laugh at them and I think they're great. And I think I agree with Ross. Anyone who says that they aren't is quite literally awful.
Yes, and also it's different because they're not like your average comic relief like other comic relief characters like are just, like if they're adults and they're very silly that you're like okay really like Jar Jar Binks or whatever I don't know but like they're kids you like if an adult is watching this and expecting kids to be acting like serious and stuff I don't know they've probably never even seen a kid because most kids are like that, like blabbing constantly. Like I love the bit with fish legs when Gobber is trying to introduce the dragons and he's just like rattling off like the statistics.
Hmm.
He's like armor 15,
Hmm.
which I don't even know what that means, but it was pretty damn funny. Excuse my language.
We will excuse it. We will excuse it. So to end off this section, I want to ask you guys a double-headed question, which is, do you think that the average adult would still find the funny parts of this film actually funny? Slash, does How to Train Your Dragon get the check mark in humor for you guys? Does it pass the adult standard for that?
I think it does for me. I feel like again when I watch it, it brings back kind of the nostalgia. Like like I'm kind of still like a teenage, like I'm not like an adult, but I think the jokes definitely still slide for me. And again, in terms of like what they're doing and how they write the scenes and what's happening in the scenes, I feel like it all makes sense and it comes across as very funny. And I think definitely it should get the check. Check for me.
Yeah, it absolutely gets the comedy check mark for me. And again, I'm not a fully fledged adult either, or really at all. But ha having watched this film several times with like my parents, they're always chuckling throughout the movie. So I see no reason this movie doesn't get that check mark. It's a check from me.
I would also agree that the film gets a check for me as well. I still had the same experience, that I felt when I watched it when I was, a boy, and yeah, I think that feeling's still there. But I would argue, like, would that feeling still be there if you were watching this the first time when you're 19 or you're 20, you know? But yeah, it's a check from me.
I think that's a great point you bring up about Tyndall mentioned nostalgia. You mentioned nostalgia a little bit. Um, and I think that that does play a role. So it is definitely tough to we try to put aside it and I guess think of it like as if we were for those people who might be viewing this for the first time as parents with their kids, or situations like that. But even then, I think Tyndall brought up a great point with the physical comedy, with Ross bringing up humor and dialogue. I still think that it also gets the check for me as well. There are still quite a few funny moments in this film that get me every time. Okay, so we are now moving on to section two, which is themes. My first question for you guys is, what do you think the main theme of the movie is? And do you think that theme could apply to you or people like you?
Ooh, I feel like it's hard for me to choose just like one main theme. I think it touches on so much um in terms of just kind of like growing up. And I think definitely like acceptance with the first film. I think Hiccup trying to find acceptance in his tribe and like like with his people, but also opening everybody up to the idea that dragons might not be so bad, and kind of like them accepting this other way of life, something that they're not really used to in the past. I think, and that opens the door kind of for what happens in the second and third movies. It kind of sets that off. And I think it's definitely something that every young person kind of struggles with at some point in their life, wanting to be accepted and kind of what will you do for that? What do you guys think?
I'll jump in here. I thought we were getting in a passion of sort of Tyndall Ross me, but okay. Um, So I'd argue that the film is about connections, and the theme's about connections. You've got Hiccup trying to form a connection with Toothless, and then you also see a father trying to connect with his son, and son trying to connect with his father. Um, I think plays a really strong part in it, and just trying to understand those connections as well, which goes back into Tyndall's point of acceptance too. There's these things which won't be there won't be what you view as a connection, like Stoic views Hiccup as this like not really a Viking, and Hiccup needs to come to accept that. But then they need to form this connection that Hiccup's different, and they can still bond over that. But yeah,
Yeah, I definitely agree with that, Rafe. I think that's a great point. I really love what both of you guys said about that. And this is sort of what you guys said, but I think the biggest thing from this movie is just you don't have to do a certain thing just because everybody else tells you it's what you should do. Because in Burke, everyone says, "Oh, you have to kill dragons. They're so dangerous. You have to kill them on sight." So just the most crucial scene in the movie is that scene where Hiccup is looks at Toothless and decides he cannot kill him. He cannot bring himself to do it. And I think that's something that we can all apply to our own lives.
I think so for sure. And I think like obviously it's portrayed as this kind of, big thing with the dragons, but taking that away and kind of stripping all of that down, what is this? And kind of Ross, exactly what you said, just because everybody says you have to be this one thing or, it's cool in school to do this one, what like, it's not kind of putting all of that aside. Like you need to be yourself. And sometimes being yourself will get you, it'll always get you being yourself will get you somewhere, better than if you're just kind of like sticking with the crowd because it's not always the right thing. And thank God he decided to free him and to learn about, that species because if he hadn't, we would have no universe. Like what?
It would just shatter. We would have nothing left. It would just be pitch black darkness.
My life would be over. All of your lives would be over.
That's true. Tyndall would end ours because
Jesus,
we're
what do
ended.
you,
wow.
guys, chill out. I was having fun on this podcast.
Ross, well,
Calm down.
okay. You guys have already alluded to multiple things, which I think is definitely a really strong suit of the movie that it has. Like I asked you guys, what do you think the main theme is? And all three of you guys gave me semi-different answers. Um, and I want to ask you guys, are there any specific characters that represent specific themes?
Well, I'll go into it like a smaller theme, like with the comic relief characters, like Snotlout. He's a very minor character, but you get a like a little theme of like with like the whole bullying thing. Like it doesn't really pay to be a jerk because he's sort of a he's kind of a mean guy to everyone, and you see it doesn't really get him anywhere. And by the end of the like he even has a character arc though. Like by the end of the movie, he learns the value of teamwork. And so like I think there's little characters that like those side characters really represent little themes.
Absolutely, absolutely. One that captured my interest a lot when we were watching it was Stoic, where he's trying to balance like this kid that's unlike everyone else and doesn't fit into their culture. And there are so many little moments where you can see it, especially in his eyes. I think they do a great work with his eyes and his face when other people aren't looking, and you can see like that he wants his son to be successful and he wants to fit in, and like we talked about him trying to bond with Hiccup, but they're not able to like get past this weird this weird disconnect. But I think acceptance, like Tyndall said, accepting your son even though he might be different than you, accepting a new possible lifestyle for your entire village that could be better. And so I thought that Stoic represented that theme really well, and I thought it was great. Yes, Rafe.
Yeah, it's funny. I just on like the topic of Stoic, I thought it was really interesting, and I only thought of this now. That Stoic is he's a single parent, he's a single father, who I believe was widowed. And I think that's really interesting how he's trying to, we kind of view him for being harsh on Hiccup, but at the same time, he's trying to balance leading a village and trying to bring up his son. And I think, I feel like when you think of How to Train Your Dragon, you don't really look at it like that because Stoic is, literally like in the name, he's stoic, he's kind of harsh, like cold. And when we see him sort of open up to Hiccup a bit, I think we just see a different side from him. And that sort of, I just feel like that single parent aspect you don't see from, you don't talk about at all from the film.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think, like you said, Rafe, there's so many undertones, kind of, there's obviously just all these people here, are we going to be friends with the dragons? Are we not? But it's so much more than that. And I think, just kind of along with acceptance, I think trust as well. I think, you know, what he's struggling with is to really trust his son and that he might be right because, yes, he's the face for the entire village. And that comes with a lot of responsibility. And, if he's going to trust his son on this, that could make or break everything for him. So, of course, it's going to be very difficult. And as a single parent, how that just that's a lot to handle. And I think for Hiccup as well, kind of knowing how much that weighs because I think he understands obviously the position that his father's in, and I think that's why it sucks so much. Is because they're just kind of like, like you guys said, they're not really on that same level. So I think once they trust each other and they kind of get on the same page and they're able to open up, um, and really trust that there is a chance for both of them, I think that kind of changes everything.
I just want to ask you guys, do you think that there are any themes in this movie that society should hear today? Like this is something that we as a human society should consider more and should think about more.
I think just kind of what we all spoke about. For sure. I mean, I have two sisters who are in high school right now, and I know kind of what we were talking about, don't just follow everybody's lead, kind of be your own person, whether that's different or not from what everyone else is doing. And I think with social media and, kind of with a lot of stuff that's happening today, it's very difficult to not kind of like join the crowd of people, and kind of just do what everyone else is doing. And I know that's something that like my sisters struggle with. And I know it's different, obviously, not the same situation in the film, but kind of like being accepting of what maybe isn't like everyone else and that that's okay and that it's good to be different, like Hiccup.
Yeah, I'm also going to jump in there and kind of relate to a point I said about, single parents. I think that's another uh, area that we should turn an eye to and take a look at. And I think it's interesting because, it's like a subplot, I think, like Tyndall said. It's you've got this incredibly bold film which is about slaying Vikings and just slaying dragons and things like that and being so stoic. And beneath that, you've got a father who's trying to connect with his son, who's also trying to lead a village and not show fear.
And just to go back off of what Rafe is saying, because I think you bring up a good point, just kind of single parenting in general, and how much of a norm that is, now, and how difficult that is. It's not as easy as people may perceive it to be, and kind of dealing with kids and raising a family, kind of on your own. That's something very, very real that people deal with every day. And I think totally something that can be talked about and that is represented, very well kind of in this film.
I think another thing that I just thought of was disabilities. Like, obviously, you have that moment at the end of the film where Hiccup has lost part of his leg and his foot and steps off the bed, and now he has a whole new life because of his injury, and he's gonna have to get used to living a new life now, which can still be great, but it's still going to be different. I also really love the moment where Toothless helps him with his leg as he's adjusting to it because that's what Hiccup has been doing for Toothless the whole movie. Because technically Toothless is disabled, and I think that it's a great message that Toothless is able to get back to the heights that he was at beforehand, both literally and figuratively with the help of people like Hiccup, with the help of his with people around him.
And two, that's not gonna stop him at all. He's gonna go and he's gonna lead a village, just like his father. And that's not ever something that, will be mentioned again. And it's because it's not part of I mean, it is part of his story, but in terms of what he can do, he doesn't shy him away from anything. He's still able to be this great person.
Are there any themes from How to Train Your Dragon that you think you've grown out of? AKA, they only apply to kids, and now when you see it, you're like, oh, that theme, like maybe. Ross mentioned bullying, but I mean, there's always bullying going on, right? So, unfortunately, so that's kind of a timeless theme.
I think so for sure. And I feel like again, every time I watch the movie, there's always something. I think when you make a really good film, it is timeless. And every time you go back and watch it, no matter how old you are, you're always going to get something from that experience. And it might be different because you've had different experiences in between the last time you watched it, but you still, you're like, okay, now you're thinking about this one thing in your life. And because all the characters are so relatable and the story is like so relatable and so universal, no matter kind of where you are in life, at least for me, because I've watched it growing up, I like would kind of get something different from it every time. But definitely still, it still applies to things that I'm struggling with in my life. And, you know, it's nice because I can identify with the characters and what they're going through.
Right. So, moving on to the last part before we move on into subtlety. It seems pretty unanimous here, but maybe Ross will prove me wrong. But do you guys think that How to Train Your Dragon gets the check mark for themes?
Ross, you want to start us off?
Yeah, I'd love to, Tyndall. Thank you. Yes, it gets the check mark for themes. The film has great themes that we have discussed, and they're still relevant even as you age. Check
Uh,
mark.
yeah, I might just follow Ross with this one. I think yeah, the film gets a check from me as well for themes. We don't need to explain it again, but I think we've covered everything in relation to just being accepted and dealing with a child as a single parent.
I totally agree. I think it definitely gets the check mark, and I think its themes are timeless. I think they'll always apply, no matter what age you are when you're watching the movie.
Gets a check mark from me as well. All right. Moving on into the next question, subtlety. Ross loves to make jokes about this all the time, but in filmmaking, there's a phrase, show, don't tell. And I know that as film enjoyers, a lot of the time when movies say something that's very obvious to us, a lot of times we'll call it out like, oh, nice exposition dump, red one. But so I want to ask you guys, are there any moments in the movie where you felt like you were being told things you already knew? Like that wasn't really necessary. Like we already knew that.
I I was going to say, I remember saying this to Ross when we were watching the film actually. Um, the part when all of them are gathered in, the big like hall, trying to find the nest, and Stoic is saying like, if we find the nest, they'll be gone and they won't have a place to go. We find the dragons, we find the nest, we destroy them. And I was like, come on, we didn't like that was a bit over the top there. Like we didn't really need that much. Yeah? But apart from that, that was the only bit of exposition which stood out for me.
There's really only one line that I can think of in the movie that I was like, okay, it was a little on the nose, but it didn't, it still worked. Which is this scene where after Toothless gets taken by Stoic on the ship, and Hiccup is like standing over watching, and he's all sad. And then Astrid comes up and she's like, "You've lost everything." And I was like, "Yeah, like it's a little bit like you're just spelling out the like emotional beats of that, but it didn't take me out of it. Like, and that's plausible that someone could say that.
No
So
shit,
I that one was cool. Yeah, I know. It's like really. He lost everything. I couldn't tell, you know. I wasn't watching the movie.
hmm And something I didn't realize on my previous watch throughs for this movie was that I totally forgot that Hiccup talks to himself quite a bit, especially like in the first part of the film. I was wondering if that worked for you guys or if you guys felt like, because I think there are films where they do it well and films where it doesn't work, like, and how you guys felt about him talking to himself.
Yeah, I think the narration at the beginning, not really him talking to himself, but kind of him talking to the audience when he was kind of explaining as the dragons are kind of attacking the village and he's explaining the dragons and their powers and what they go after. Like some of the stuff I thought that he was like talking about was literally what was happening on screen. He's like, and they really like to take these sheep, and then the sheep are sitting there. And then you're like, I wonder what's gonna happen. And then they come in and they take the sheep. I feel like some of like the small stuff like that, we could have like understood ourselves. But that's I think Hiccup like talking to himself that didn't really like bother me as much. But I thought like the narration at the beginning could have been a little less like this is what's but again for kids watching, it might be nice to have that stuff, kind of like spelled out for you.
Yeah, I'm just going to jump in here as well. I remember, when he finds Toothless down on the ground, and he has to sort of speak to himself like, I'm a Viking, I'm gonna rip out your heart and take it to my father. That like that line there and that sort of monologue definitely did not take me out. I think it was kind of like effective in its way that he was speaking to himself to kind of assure himself that what he's going to do about what he's going to do, and he's almost fooling himself as well. So I remember Matthew, you said like at the start it was more dominant where this exposition was used, but I think like it was in aid of his character, his character.
In movies, there's a term called planting and payoff, where moments early in the movie or are paralleled later in the movie. Were there any plants and payoffs that caught you off guard or that you'd never noticed before? And were there any that you thought were pretty obvious?
Maybe maybe the you just gestured to all of me. Like when that happens at the beginning and you're like, oh, okay, that's probably gonna come back at the very end. There's a bunch of other ones too. Because I remember like that whole ending scene was just payoff after payoff after payoff. Oh, we're Vikings. It's an occupational hazard. Like
Yeah.
that one. That one came back.
I love
That was
the
a nice one. I didn't see that one coming.
I never realized that there's a plant where when Hiccup and Toothless are chilling out and there's the little dragons, Toothless shoots into one of its mouths and it's just it just is done after that. And then that comes up at the climax when Toothless turns around and he shoots a fireball into the giant dragon's mouth and that's what defeats it. I thought that was like a really subtle one that I didn't realize before until now.
Yeah,
Yeah.
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 Okay, if you guys were to only watch the first 10 minutes of this movie, do you think that you would be able to guess what happens in the end? And do you think that's a good thing or a bad thing in this movie's case?
Where would we sort of draw the line for like the 10 minutes?
Um, let's say let's say right after Hiccup lets Toothless go. I don't know if that's 10 minutes. That might actually be much later, but let's say right after that. He lets Toothless go.
I think you'd be able to tell Hiccup forming a relationship with Toothless, but I do not think you'd be able to tell um, the whole story about, him struggling to connect with his father and him, also having to lose a leg and, having to have this whole siege on the nest and whatnot. Um, but I think definitely be able to tell the relationship that's going to be formed.
I think just to counter that a little bit, I feel like when he lets Toothless go, he's just done what really no one before him has done because everyone, if they were to be face to face with the Night Fury, one of the most dangerous dragons, they would kill it. And by him not killing it, we can assume, yes, that he's going to form a relationship. But I think also we can kind of assume that at some point, if he's going to form this relationship, he's going to have to talk to his dad about it, or his dad is going to find out because his dad is like leading these people. And I feel like we can kind of infer that it's going to at least cause a bit of like a rumble on like the Isle of Berg. I think people, it's a small village. I think once he does that, if he's going to get attached, there's going to be, repercussions for that.
I think like from the opening scene, you can sort of guess that the movie's gonna end with the people of Berk accepting dragons. it's just one of those types of movies where the protagonist changes everyone's worldview. I think like you from the opening scene, yeah, you know that like everyone's gonna be riding around on dragons in the end.
Yeah, but is that a bad thing? I know another point that I've seen against some animated films, not as much this one I've seen, but some animated films is that they're too simple and they're very simplistic with their plot. You can guess, what the just from seeing the beginning what the end is going to be. And do you guys think that that's something that makes a movie more mature if you can't see where it's going?
Not necessarily. I feel like, yes, we can infer kind of like what Ross said from the beginning, like this protagonist is going to change the view of everyone else. But there's so much depth to it, and I think our whole conversation, kind of like what we've been talking about in regards to themes and relationships, you know, we set up so many relationships in the beginning, and obviously all of that is going to change. And I think it's such a big thing, like that they establish at the beginning that they're killing these creatures, and that he's obviously choosing like not to kill one. I feel like that's such a, I mean, that's we're consider like life or death. And yes, like we might know where it's going, but how we get to that point, I think I was pleasantly surprised, what happened kind of in between. And I don't think it's a bad thing at all if you know what you're doing.
And this is not the type of movie that needs to be like super unpredictable or complicated. It's a simple story about like a kid and his pet dragon, but like just let it be that. I mean, it's really I think a more complicated plot would ruin it. There's really no need for that.
Yeah. Yeah, I definitely both agree with the two of you. I think it's unpredictable, in some ways which are good, Like going back to like how Hiccup loses a leg. Yeah, everything kind of turns out okay, but like that's just the consequences of everything turning out okay. And I think that kind of, you know, aids the story and carries it through a bit more.
So I want to ask you guys, we're moving on to the next section. So I want to ask you guys, does How to Train Your Dragon get the check marks for subtlety? For me, that's a check.
Check from me.
Check for me.
All right. Moving on to layers. Shrek would love this section, but Shrek is not here, so Ross will have to do. Okay. So,
Is Donkey coming?
Don't
um,
worry, Ross, I'll be your donkey.
Guys, I'm scared of that movie. Not to go on
oh,
the team.
of Shrek?
It's a scary film.
Matthew, I have a question.
Yes.
Is this podcast about Shrek or How to Train Your Dragon?
How did I know Ross was gonna say some sort of sarcastic, just totally
AKA
No,
not?
I'm genuinely
Ross does
curious.
not
I'm
want to be.
genuinely curious. You know, I honestly don't know anymore. I think we've spent more time on
Okay,
Shrek
well,
than we
strap
did
in! Get
on anything
ready!
else. Why are you yelling?
Ross, if you stop asking questions, we could come back to the podcast.
Thank you,
Come
Ray.
on.
Thank you,
Oh,
Ray, for stating the
animosity.
Yeah,
obvious.
Rafe, I love this professional attitude. Yeah, you're
Ooh.
really coming across as a
Business
real stand-up
casual.
guy.
Mhm,
Business casual, Ross.
exactly. Okay.
Rafe, a moment ago you said that you could be my donkey. Okay, I don't think you're the professional one here. Anyway,
Ross,
Matthew,
let's continue,
please
please.
continue.
I want to ask you guys, and if you guys could all try to give me a different answer if you can. If you can't, that's totally understandable. But what do you guys think is the character that you relate to the most as an adult now?
I feel like Hiccup is the most relatable character easily. Like I feel like that's who you're supposed to relate to. The whole story's through his eyes. We're with him pretty much the whole time. I can't actually imagine relating to many of the other characters, at least not at this age.
I will make the argument in that for Stoic. I feel like at this point I can kind of relate to him, not in terms of a single parent way, obviously, but in terms of having a little brother who doesn't necessarily fit into what society expects him to be. How Stoic is trying to essentially steer Hiccup in what he deems to be the right direction. Um, and I feel that because like don't want to mess with my little brother's individuality, and I know that our family doesn't want to, but but I know that it you can see it weighs on Stoic, and you know that the whole village kind of looks down on Hiccup, and how individual should he be able to be? And I don't know.
I totally agree with that. And I think that's again kind of the nice thing with there's so many complex characters in this film. There's a lot that you can um kind of dive into. I also think Astrid, at least in the first film, I think, being like very ambitious about what she does and she's kind of skeptical, at first. And I think kind of I can relate to that, not in like that situation, obviously, but just kind of like being skeptical of like what is different, is different good? And there's something that I definitely felt, when I moved schools to go to school in Florida and like leave my home. But then kind of trusting in that. And thank God I did because it changed my life. And I think for her, trusting Hiccup and trusting how he felt about Toothless and the entire dragon world changed her life. And I think being skeptical is good, but not letting it overshadow, um, kind of like what also could be great about, taking a risk and taking like a leap.
When kids like something, they often watch it over and over and over again. Do you guys think that How to Train Your Dragon is something that's very rewatchable?
Yeah, I think so. I think the film score complements like the action in the film as well, and it's got a lot of nice heartfelt beats to it too. It kind of has a bit of everything that you want in it. And I think the fact that it constantly builds up to the climax in the end, having this huge fight allows it, people to come back and watch it again. I mean, I would definitely say if I saw it on the TV, I'd put it on.
I definitely agree with that, Rafe. And I also think what you mentioned about the score and I think the soundtrack, it's so iconic and something that I listen to a lot. And um, obviously the music kind of bring back to the film. And sometimes like I'll turn it on or I'll watch a scene or two from the movie. And kind of like what I've just said before and what you said too, Rafe. Like it's timeless and it's such a simple yet complex story. And it's something that, like once you kind of see it and understand it the first like couple of times, you might just put it on maybe like while you're doing something else, but it still grips you every time. At least that's how it is for me.
Yeah, I think it's incredibly rewatchable. I mean, I've just based on the fact that I've rewatched it so many times and I enjoy it every time. It's it's also fairly short. It's not like a big commitment to sit through How to Train Your Dragon, and the movie flies by too. Like we got to the end, like the whole like massive dragon in the cave, and I was like, we're already on this. Like the movie, it goes by very quickly. It leaves you wanting more too. Like I'm so glad they did the sequels. This is one of those movies that like it really benefits from the sequels because there's more stories to tell with these characters.
It's so true. They have so much to expand on. And I think they expand in the right ways. And it's like also one of the ones I know Matthew, like we've discussed this before, and we're talking about the first one, but liking a sequel better than the original because they do such a great job at recreating and kind of expanding on this world that they live in. I love the second one so much.
So, we're at the end of this layers section. So I want to just ask you guys real quick, does it get the check? Gets the check from me.
Check.
Check.
Check for me, Matthew.
Okay, so we are now moving on into the censorship section. For our listeners who might not be as versed in the film industry, a lot of times when something is made, it goes through a ton of changes through the studio. What the studio wants a writer to do, what a studio wants a director to do, and so they kind of have their hands in everywhere. So I just want to ask you guys, do you feel like the creator's vision for this movie was fully realized? Or do you think that the studio might have had to change some of its parts that weren't as kid friendly?
I think it was fully realized. And I also think this was something I was talking with my sister about this today in terms of being like a kid-friendly movie because I feel like there's a lot of like they don't shy away from like the violence and the death and kind of the hardship that happens in any of these films. And obviously like in the first one, when he meets Toothless, it's like, am I gonna kill you or am I not? So I feel like there's definitely like some parts that aren't necessarily kid friendly. So I think if that was going to be like taking out something to make it more kid friendly, I didn't really see that.
So, How to Train Your Dragon is about a friendship, obviously, and it's a friendship that overcomes all odds, even the odds of two groups that absolutely hate each other and that have shown only violence towards each other. And so, do you think that if the remake leaned into more violence, showing more violence between those groups, do you think that it could help that theme of love overcoming that or friendship overcoming that? Or do you think that it might hurt the movie if they showed more violence?
I think for sure. I think it's going to raise the stakes. And I also feel like the franchise, I feel like they are quite violent already. I mean, just in my mind. I tried to turn on the show for the kids that I babysat like a couple weekends ago, and the kid's 5, and he like got too scared of just the first scene because it opens up and the dragons are attacking the village. And I think obviously we understand what's going on because we're older, but I think for like younger kids who are just simply like watching it, I think sometimes it's violent. So I feel like with the live action, however violent they decide to make, I feel like there's not really a because in my opinion, I think the animated films were kind of violent. But I think yeah, raising the stakes would be nice.
I can see Tyndall's point there. I also don't think it needs to be more violent at all. I mean, I I I think the first film is perfect as it is. Honestly, I'm glad you brought up the remake because quite frankly, I just don't see the point of it, honestly. I think the first film is one of the most perfect movies ever made. And to try to do a live action remake really just feels like a cash grab to me.
I I argue on that just because I feel like there have been obviously live action remakes in the past that have just kind of like flunked and they've been really bad. But you're putting real characters in on screen, and obviously it makes everything kind of feel more real. Yes, of course, the animation is immersive.
But doesn't the story already feel so real? Isn't it so real already?
It is, it is. I think 100%, but I feel like adding, putting a real person next to this dragon, I think at least for maybe kids or people who are watching it, they can feel super relatable towards the character. Not that the animation is it does that perfectly, but I feel like there's such a big How to Train Your Dragon audience, and I think fans are really excited to see kind of what they're going to do, with this. And even if it is the same, how they're going to illustrate that, through because it's a different medium, it's no longer animation. So like there's going to have to be even in the way that they, people are talking about like shot by shot remake, but just in the way that they're creating this film, there's going to be some differences. And again, it's going to feel, in my mind, like seeing real people on screen. That automatically makes it feel like, we're not animated characters, like that's a real person with flying, on that dragon.
I feel like it being animated characters almost makes it a little more relatable. Like Hiccup's a character because he's not one specific actor who's you see on screen. You can really put yourself in his shoes. Like I don't see the relatability increasing
In
from.
fairness, Ross, you still do see him. And I just jump in here. I think that, the film is perfect how it is in its balance to violence and not. And how this remake is going to turn out will be depending on how they show this violence. We see Toothless in the animation with his tail missing. I forget what that back part of his tail is called. But it'll be interesting to see how they portray things like that in the live action. And I think that's going to be a large factor. And the studio is going to have to, pick a side on whether they want to stick with this kids animation or just go with the adults and, show this violence in a more excessive view.
I think that's definitely going to be so dependent. And I think it'll be really interesting. I think that's something that like I'm kind of looking forward to see, how is this kind of going to play out on screen? And also these actors, the guy who's playing Hiccup, he isn't some like well-known like crazy guy. I mean, he's been in like one other film, so like he's not like ever like no, not everyone's like pining over like this guy. He's a kid. And I think it's not going to be, I feel like we're still going to see these characters as they are. I don't think we're going to like separate them based on who's playing them. I feel like that's still going to be there, in my opinion.
Well, I'll just close it off with I think I'll close it I because I've made my point. I think the remake it's offering very little of substance. There's really no point to remaking an already perfect film unless you've got really something new to add to it in terms of style or story or something. But it se and this could just be my impression. It seems like they're just making the same movie again. And in my opinion, it has nothing to offer. I might not even go see it because I can just watch the animation, which only came out 14 years ago. It's still a fairly recent movie.
Obviously, there are some films that have a great story, but have not aged particularly well in some aspects. I'm thinking of like Disney classics like Peter Pan, Pinocchio, just any Disney movie from that era, pretty much. So I just want to ask you guys, do you think this movie has aged well to you guys? And for parents watching this with their kids, are there any stereotypes that you think they need to watch out for?
No, I don't. I don't think there's anything to worry about. I mean, again, the movie came out in 2010. Like, it's not like this is some 40s movie that is so problematic or anything. There's not. I think it depicts everything perfectly. There's nothing that I can think of that hasn't aged well. Yeah, there's not an issue.
In regards to the story and anything like that, it hasn't aged badly. I think, which is why they're doing a live action of it.
The only stereotype that I can think of that I've heard for How to Train Your Dragon is with Astrid being the girlfriend character. So I was just wondering if you guys had any thoughts on Astrid, because I think that the only like accusations in terms of that is that she's only there to be Hiccup's, I guess, sort of emotional guide where, she's the one at the end who's like, oh, you've lost everything, and gets sort of picks him up on his feet. She's, do you guys see her as just the girlfriend character, or do you think that she brings more to the story than that? I think Tyndall's already alluded to this.
Yeah, I think she brings a lot to the story, and I think she is obviously like I feel like she knows him best, when they kind of form this friendship in the first film. And she's kind of always asking him the real questions, in the second film and in the third film, whenever they talk. And that's somebody that he feels that he can talk to, somebody that he can trust. And I think that's incredibly important. And I think everybody like has someone like that. And I think, yes, she is the love interest, but also, people fall in love, I think that's totally, totally normal. And again, something that he has to balance amidst all this other stuff in that first film. It just adds so much more. And I think she's great. She's the first person, he kind of like really confides in with this new thing that he has, and making her trust him. I think that that's a really important.
Yeah, I mean, I think Astrid is a great character. I think to call her just like the girlfriend character doesn't really make any sense. That would like, but you could say like, oh, Stoic is just the father character. Just because she is his girlfriend or whatever does not mean she's a poorly written character at all. I think she's terrific and she's super like independent and free thinking and she's not there just to fall for Hiccup. Like she brings her own value to it as well.
Okay. So does this movie check the box for us in the last one, in the last section, censorship? For me, I would say yes.
Jack.
Yep, check.
Check, check.
Well, to everyone who has made it this far, it would appear that every single one of us, have a grand total of 5 out of 5 check marks. So, Our ratings are in, and to those of you listening, let us know if you agree or disagree with our choices. As a reminder, we aren't trying to say if a movie is good or bad, just how adult-centric or kid-centric we think this is. Thank you so much to Tyndall.
Yes, thank you guys.
Thank you so much to Rafe.
Yes, thank you guys.
And thank you so much to Ross.
Thank you, Matthew. This has been great talking with all of you.
And we'll see you guys in the next episode.